Hello and welcome to the latest conversation in the Field Service News Digital Symposium. For those of you that are new, which I know there are many of, first of all, welcome. It is great to see our little community on Field Service News Premium and Field Service News Elite flourishing, and thank you ever so much for your support. Those of you that have been around the block, I mean, we're on what episode, something like 44, 45 now. You'll know what this is all about. This is where we have the long form conversations. This is where we take the time to dig beneath the data. If it's talking about research, we go beyond the headlines. If we're talking about new solutions, and sometimes we just bring people on who I've known for a long time, and I really, really, really respect their opinion. And that's what I've done today. I've brought on a very good friend of mine, Michael Blumberg. Michael is the CEO of Blumberg Advisory Group, a name I'm sure many, many people will recognise. Been writing for Field Service News as one of our associate columnists. Gosh, since the beginning, Michael, I think pretty much. But let me do what I do, which is the tradition here, and let you introduce yourself properly, because you will do a far better job than I will, as I've just proven. So for those that don't know you, Michael, just give us a quick introduction to your background. And
Yeah, thank you, Kris. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I think it's been decades since we've known each other and been working together. It seems that way. So my background is I am a management consultant and a market researcher. I started working in the service industry, almost after college. And I'll date myself, it was 1985. And I got involved in this industry because my father, had a management consulting firm which I took over. I renamed it to Blumberg Advisory Group. It was DF Blumberg and Associates. Uh, and when he passed, I changed the name. But anyway, he in 1985 he saw that this service industry was going to take off. He saw there's a tremendous opportunity, and he's had that vision was because he was working with IBM at the time, who was a leader in service and support on their products, and they're running service and support almost as at that time as a profit center, and also working with AT&T at that time in the mid '80s in the United States. AT&T was split up. It was determined that they were a monopoly in the United States. If you're a monopoly, you can't, but you can't be a monopoly. So the federal court ruled that it needed to be split up into what we called at the time Baby Bell operating companies. And each of those Baby Bell operating companies were responsible for making a profit. They no longer had a competitive market. And now they had to compete on the basis of the quality of their services and also of their ability to generate more revenue, not just from telephone and telecommunications, but they were allowed to get in other markets. So that's where he started consulting to these companies and saw, hey, there's this whole discipline around how do you build and grow a service company. And that's around the time I got involved in the business. And, I learned everything there was about service, started doing market research studies, finding out what customers' wants and needs were for our services. From there, I got involved in sizing the market for the services, and then had a, diverted my attention a little bit, started benchmarking the state of the art of field service management software, did one of the first benchmarking studies of software. And then from there, I got involved in benchmarking service operations, looking at the processes and systems in place and looking at what impact they had on their KPIs, and how the KPIs and how the metrics can change based on what they're doing from a process and systems perspective. And then to kind of round out my knowledge of the industry and my discipline in helping companies grow, I got involved in mergers and acquisitions. So over the years, I've been involved in either helping companies buy service businesses, large Fortune 500 companies buy service businesses, or in some cases, sell off a division that they just no longer wanted to invest in. So pretty
Yeah,
broad.
I think it's a very, very humble way of phrasing when you say to round off that knowledge, because that knowledge is deep and there's a lot of ground. Just
Thank you.
anecdotally, conversations we've had in the past. You've probably forgotten more than I could know. So that's a very, very nice touch of humility there, mate. But one of the things I always find fascinating when we catch up, Michael, is you often have an eye on what's down the road. You know, for example, we've had a lot of conversations about various technologies or the shift towards various trends. I'm fortunate enough to have hung around with smart people for long enough. Some of it's rubbed off on me, and so I know my way around the servitization trend, for example. Like I was kind of at the forefront of the understanding of that from a journalistic point of view. The technology is obviously a world we're embedded in. But one of the things that really struck me recently when we were having a conversation, and I know it's a focus for yourself at the moment, is the work that you're doing around service marketing. And that was I mean, we've been trying to set up get you onto the field service symposium since it launched. But one of the things that I really wanted to bring you on and specifically have that conversation was around that, because I think that's an area that it's woefully and there's nowhere near enough conversation around it. And one of the things I find when I speak to service directors, almost always, is they tend to have come up through the business. They may have come from a different service organisation, but they tend to have quite a myopic view of operations. They know the service more than the operations more inside out, and then they suddenly hit this level where they're starting to get to the VP or the service director level, and they find themselves, and I've heard this story so many times, they find themselves in that first executive meeting, and they've got to have a conversation with the CFO, and they may get 10 minutes to kind of represent the service division at a 2-hour meeting, and then it's like, right, questions from the CFO, questions from the CMO. The CEO expects everything to work wonderfully, and it's very much a sink or swim area. And there's a very big difference. Because I know my apples when it comes to marketing. I have to. I'm in publishing. And there's a very big difference between how you market service and how you market product. So that's a kind of a rambling segue into kind of getting you to talk to us a little bit about the importance of it, and just your thoughts because I know the work you're doing at the moment. I just want to expand in that to begin. Let me keep the floor to you.
Right, Kris. Service marketing has always been a passion of mine. And it became that way was because early in my career, when I was doing the traditional management consulting, market research, and strategic planning, I'd often be confronted with this comment by members of the client's team. They'd say, "Well, your market research says that there's a big opportunity for us to sell service contracts and offer added value services, but we're having a hard time selling our basic service. How are they going to buy these advanced services that your research says? We don't know that we can believe you." And what I did was I dug under the covers to find out what was going on. And what was going on is they just didn't know how to market it or even sell it. They just thought, since they had a captive market, and remember, these were mostly manufacturers that I consulted to, they thought since they made the equipment, people should buy the service just because they made the equipment. And because they weren't buying the service, they naturally assumed there was no market. But that wasn't the case at all. They just weren't using the right approaches to marketing. They weren't stressing the value proposition of the service. They weren't identifying what problem or pain it could solve for the customer. They weren't aware of the value and use of the service, that the customer could lose a lot of money if they didn't get service in a timely manner. So that's why I took that on.
One of the things that I see a jarring kind of there's a juxtaposition, and I find it a hard one to square. It's a square peg round hole situation. Almost always the passion for the service, and the passion for driving excellence, and the passion and belief in this is something that we should sell upon. That always comes from a service leader, from the service division. It doesn't come outside of that. And I know we've made a lot of ground across the last 5 years or so in terms of breaking down silos, and we talk about that all the time, with the importance of data transferring. But that belief, that passion, that's the word, the passion. It sits with the service leader. And all too often, the marketing department will sit elsewhere. There'll be
That's
a
right.
centralized organization. And so I see this time and time again. There is a disconnect between where the story is, and I'm a big believer in kind of understanding the logos, the pathos, the ethos, and making sure that mix is there within the marketing messaging. But that's a skill set. But that all of the real stuff that creates that story that will sell it, that's kept within the service organization, and that skill set doesn't often come into interaction,
Yeah,
and there's not a
100%.
crossover
Agree
there.
with you.
I mean, is that something? Do you think that's the most fundamental bit that a lot of service organisations are missing? Is that
Yeah,
communication between the service leadership and the marketing leadership?
yeah. If they're really run as a true profit center or strategic line of business, they'd have their own marketing resources, but they don't for some reason. It's in corporate marketing or in product marketing. And let's face it, there's not. If you're doing most of your job is on product marketing, you tend to lose that edge, that competitive advantage and knowledge you have about what makes services great and how to market services. I don't know what it's like in business school now, but I know when I was in business school, they didn't teach anything about service marketing. It was all product. So there's this kind of like product bias, product mentality when it comes to marketing services that these service companies need to have. These divisions need to really have, a champion in their company that, telling the story about services.
Yeah, it's interesting because we look at some of the most successful brands in the world, and the one of them that comes to mind is Apple. And Apple is one of the few examples of an organization that has actually understood the value of service. I mean, don't get me wrong, the product is fantastic, and this isn't a plug. I work in media. I have to have, for a lot of the video product editing work we do. It's industry standard. But the bit that I always see in Apple is the Genius Bar. I thought, without a
Hmm.
pun, I think that's such a clever move. If you look at the pricing realistically compared to Tom's Hardware down the road, it's astronomical compared to. But we buy into the expertise. We buy into that nicely branded store. And that can translate so much in field service. You buy into the subject matter expert. It's the van that's parked up at the front. Tony Chapman, the UK general manager for Siemens, he explained this to me really well. He said, I make sure my engineers, and I've done this, and he's a very senior gentleman in that organisation, and again, he's got that kind of made that way up those ladders. He's saying, I've done this ever since I was a service manager. One of the first things you say is, make sure you park your van at the front. Make
It's the
sure
little things. Yeah.
make sure that make sure the engineers are smart, make sure they're early, make sure all of those little things. He said, because that's service marketing as well, because that's saying we will deliver a better layer of service. But what so
So we call
what
that the warm and
challenge?
fuzz. We used to call that the warm and fuzzies.
Say again, sorry.
We used to refer to that as the warm and fuzzies.
Yeah,
If you give a
yeah.
nice service experience, they'll come back for more.
Mm. And it's the it
But
is
you,
those
you mentioned
intense.
something before about about Apple and being more market oriented, and
Mm.
we're seeing that transition occur. But I think why there's been so much of a lag and why services is behind the rest of the organization is historically that service operation was perceived as not having a big economic value. Didn't
Yeah,
contribute a lot of economic value to the firm. If you think of the theory of the firm, what is service? For many years there was a lot of guys sitting around for a service event to occur, and the service event suggested there was something wrong with the product. So it
yeah.
took a while for people to see service as a proactive way of pulling through more product sales.
Yeah,
Very
it's
opposite.
interesting because that's something I was going to ask about. I mean, is that one of the big challenges? Do we still have that stigma that you don't promote the service because at the same time your messaging is saying that the product's going to fail, and
Yeah,
we're
I'm still running into it.
we're still trying to live
20,
under this. it's a what's the word? It's this great kind of myth, I suppose, that we're still trying to perpetuate some 30
And
years on, that nothing is
that's
right.
right.
And
2021,
so,
I'm still hearing that.
yeah, and it's so I suppose, well, I mentioned servitization a wee bit earlier, and that's an area that I've been quite heavily involved with a lot of the academics, and done a ton of different kind of interviews and studies, and written quite a few pieces on there. Um, is that going to be a catalyst? Because one of the things that I'm thinking here from what you're saying is, for service organisations, manufacturers in particular, to get their head around service marketing, it needs to be driven from the top. Unless you've got a particularly vocal service leader within the organisation, and there are many, and I know a lot of greats that would take that route. But equally, for every one of those real true leaders, there's going to be the rest of the pack
Hmm.
that may not put their hand up and say, look, we need to shout about this. Does it need to be driven from the top? And do you think, I'm going to put two questions to you at the same time, so I apologise, but does it need to be driven from the top to get service marketing right? And secondly, do you think that something else that's driven from the top, the shift towards advanced services, and more strategic thinking around service as a revenue generator, do you think that will naturally kind of make people wake up about the fact that they could really start switching on to service marketing?
Yeah, two very interesting questions. So the first one, does it have to be driven from the top? Well, it depends. It depends if that service executive sees himself as a leader, willing to raise his hand or fight the battle internally, to beef up the marketing. But eventually, though, even that leader, even the strongest of leaders in the service organization, does have to get the buy-in from the CEO. So in a way, yes, they need to be either be driven from the top or be able to influence the top echelons of leadership to support and invest in the marketing of the service organization. And now your second question, yes, I believe that I agree that the servitization trend will put more resources and emphasis on the marketing. But uh, the jury's still out. I don't, it's still very new, but whether it's still going to be product driven, is the service team going to be brought in like after the fact, after they decided to go in this direction, and now they're doing workshops to implement it, or are they going to be brought in in the early stages and even own the marketing?
Is it do you think we'll see some kind of just again thinking off to my head here? Do you think that we'll see the hybrid? So it'll no longer be service marketing or product marketing, but solution focused marketing.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
something we can expect
yeah,
to see.
yeah. And so let's kind of go a little bit of a 101, because there'll be a lot of service directors here. You know our audience. Like I said, you've been writing for them for a long time. They know you. So that's that. In the main, it's generally your service director that will be watching us today. Um, where does that service director that's frustrated, that is watching this and going, yes, yes, finally somebody's saying what I've been saying, but what do I do about it? How do they push it up? How do they raise their head above the parapet, or what can they do as a proactive first starting point? I'm always a fan, and I always believed in the fact that if you go to somebody with an idea, a solution, it's going to get a green light a lot easier than just going to somebody and going, we need to do this. This is a problem. I haven't any idea how to solve it. So for those guys watching, what would your first kind of, what's the first thing to do if you
The
don't have the
first
right team?
thing is to start with the end in mind,
Yeah.
and I think that the way they can get people to listen to them and make change is to be able to build a business case about why they should do something. I hear a lot of service marketers and managers say, well, we should offer contracts. If we offer contracts, our customers will be happier, or we should expand, to offer more advanced services or value added services. Everyone's doing it. People want it. But you have to have the data behind you to say that, to back it up. And then not only just show what percentage of your customers want and need the service, but show some type of pro forma forecast or a market sizing and forecast of if we offer this type of service, whether it's something as basic as moving from next day service contracts to same day service contracts, what's the revenue opportunity and forecast going to look like, or if it's more like an as a service offering. So you got to show that because data talks, and data related to dollars or pounds or whatever currency talks even louder.
Yeah, yeah. It's it's almost exactly the same conversation as when we talk to maybe one of the vendors, and they say, well, look, get the numbers, get the data, get the ROI, because that's what will open the eyes of the CFO. It's the same thing, isn't it? It's get the data, show that end story, because that's how you'll get the buy-in for that project.
Now, as part of that, Kris, they still may need a little education about service. So a little put a gratuitous plug in here. We have a course on our website, and we're also going to be launching some courses with you as well that help service executives, managers, and directors understand the mind shift and the shift in their thinking that needs to occur for them to start building the case study. So just a couple highlights of what they should be doing is just understand that in every product there's a service opportunity. And sometimes, many times, in fact, you could spend more on those service opportunities over the life cycle of that product than you do on the original purchase price of the product. And when they understand that, they could start their perspective changes, and they could start constructing models of what would it look like. Because without that, it's like you're. We used to use the term you're trying to hammer a square peg in the round hole, or you're talking two different languages.
Yeah. To put it into a bit more a bit more towards Cockney, it's apples and oranges.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, which is more this side of. And anyone watching that's from London and the UK will go, that's not Cockney. But for anyone watching in the States, that really is. I can blag some people. I can on one side of the audience. I can't on the other.
yeah.
So I'll let you guys be the decider. But it's close enough. Like you know what I mean. I mean that's a really good point actually because. Again, it depends on folks at home which order you're watching this. If you've seen this just as it came out, as it's come out, or a little bit afterwards. Because I know from feedback, a lot of you kind of binge watching the previous older episodes. So I know that's something that a lot of people do when they first sign up. So Michael, you're going to be doing a course with us as part of the masterclass series.
That's exactly right. Yeah,
Which
really looking forward to it.
yeah, it's going to be great. I mean, the masterclass series, if you're a member of Field Service News Elite, it's fantastic. We've got people like Michael, we've got some of the great thinkers, and people I'm very lucky to call friends like Jim Baston, Nick Frank, Jan van Ven, each having a specialist area in their domain. Michael's going to be working on a project around the service marketing, and the idea is that it gives you enough tools to essentially go and build that project out. And what we always recommend is, look, we give you these tools for free because we believe in rising all boats. Then when you get to the end of that and you can see that project and how that project's going to map out, you can connect with Michael or Jim or Nick or whoever's the course leader, and they'll give you some pointers. If you want to accelerate that project, I strongly recommend you connect with them and see what else you guys can work together on. But that's coming up very, very soon. But there's also a series of content that you've got already on, which will be in the FSN catalogue as well as via Michael's site as well. And those are more kind of courses that are bite-sized, Michael, or talk to us a little bit about those courses that you've already got existing.
Well, we have a course called Successful Service Marketing. So I designed that to be like a mini MBA in
Yeah.
service marketing. And we look at strategic mindset, which is something we're going to share on Field Service News Elite, FSN Elite, for free, so they can get kind of a taste of it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
so so that's one of the modules. Another module is on the role of market research. Another one's on pricing services. Another one is how do you market the services, and another one's on how do you sell the services.
Excellent stuff. I mean, one of the things that leaps out to me in this conversation is there I think we all know the answer, but I'd be keen to understand your approach. Um, how big is the difference? I'll phrase it as, because I think we all know there is a difference. How big is the difference between upselling service to an existing client and selling service as a new, an entirely new venture to essentially somebody that would be a completely fresh client? Because that's something that's happening more and more now, isn't it? We're seeing manufacturers in particular being able to look at a site. We're seeing it led by the field as well. We're seeing the field service engineers kind of be able to say, look, do you know that we can actually service that for you, even if it's a competitor? So there are so many different facets to this conversation. But
Yeah.
to boil it back down to, you've got existing cross sell, upsell, or new sell. The marketing on both of those, how different are they, and what kind of considerations do we need to make?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah, so a lot of my consulting was around that, expanding into other areas because we did that in some cases. Uh, the, our clients, I'll just give you a little bit of background. Our clients' install base was declining, but while it's declining and the costs are rising while the revenue is declining, so to speak, you can't afford to let go of the technicians, right? Because the moment you let them go, you can't service your install base, even though it's declining. So you have to find some other way to utilize them. So you have to move into some new markets. So sometimes it's a little easier to expand because if you have customers that you're currently serving, and this is kind of a contrarian view too, they may be so entrenched with this is all we want today, or we're a self-maintainer, or this is all we need. We know what you can do. We don't need any more. Thank you very much. It's almost easier to find new markets to serve, provide you have the skills. And that's the biggest challenge. I think that's what scares companies is that, well, how are we going to get the knowledge? How are we going to get the spare parts to do that?
Yeah, that's
But
interesting because it is, and there's such an opportunity there as well.
yeah, huge.
Um, and also, I mean, one of the things that comes to me
Oh,
that
Kris,
I
sorry,
think,
one more thing I have because
yeah,
I'm
please,
passionate about this. I got a little excited, getting a little
yeah, go
excited
for
here.
it, go for it.
So also cross sales is an opportunity. So I've worked on some strategies where similar thing where the install base was declining on the core product, but there was so much in the four walls of that customer site that they could come in and offer like a total site
Yeah,
service package. Seen that a lot in banking and in retail and even in
yeah,
healthcare.
and it's again, what's in. Well, here's a great question for you actually, because I know your your fingerprints run across a number of different industries, to put it that way. I know you've got touch points in a number of different sectors. Um, are there are there certain sectors that are ahead of others, and there are certain sectors that we can look to learn from? I'm thinking again, of echoes of. I was having a conversation today with Hilbrand Rostema from Noventum, and we were talking about how, well, in certain areas there are learnings from manufacturing that can look at the software industry. And as we move to everything as a service, there's different sectors. Healthcare suddenly has done one thing. HVAC, I'm always amazed how far ahead HVAC is. Um, from a marketing point of view, does that apply? Are there certain industries? I would imagine, you mentioned IBM and HP at the beginning. Obviously, kind of pioneers of service to a degree. And I know your father was involved in that area. I mean, I would imagine they're much more mature in their understanding of how to market services as an
Yes,
industry.
yes.
So just talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so yeah, there are a number of industries where they're more advanced, and it probably has to do, for one, is that these industries are representative of markets that have highly distributed, extremely densely populated installed base. So that you look for IT, IT services. Another one is retail technologies, which in a way, retail technology is an IT. And if you take off the cover, it's a computer under it. Yeah. I guess the same could be said about a lot of manufacturing, but they're not as distributed. Okay. Another one would be medical devices, big area, and part of that is because in a hospital, for some hospitals, they find some hospitals prefer to do in-house maintenance and they take on service of everything, but others know they want to have a single point of contact for servicing all the technologies. So they'll turn to an external vendor for that.
Well, here's a thought on that that's just dropped into my head. Because again, healthcare is always an interesting one. I've always found it fascinating. I've spoken at the field service medical show many times, both here in. It no longer is here in Europe, but when it was here in Europe, I spoke regularly at it, as well as San Diego. Always at a lovely golf course in San Diego.
Torrey
That show.
Pines,
That's not
probably.
why I go. That's not why I go. But it's always. Do you know the one time, the first time I went there, actually, it hadn't rained in in San Diego for something like 5 years. I flew out as a
Did you
Welshman.
feel like writing a song about that?
It rained for 4 days.
Yeah,
All I had to do was turn up. The weather follows me. It's a Welsh
gotcha.
thing.
No, I was just
But
kidding. There's a song about it. Never rains in sunny Southern California.
oh, there you go. There you go. It does. It does when I turn up. Apparently.
Gotcha.
Um,
You brought the
but
weather with you. Yeah.
everywhere it goes, I always bring
Yeah.
the weather with me. I'll return that song for you, a bit of telemetry for those British rock fans. But the point I'm getting to before I completely digress, um, I've always found it fascinating because it's a very complex sector, and most of us in the media in field service have taken the route that we have at Field Service News. The guys at WBR, the guys at Copperberg over in the Nordics, and good relationships all across the board with all of them. And we've all largely spoken at a horizontal level. And the only difference being was WBR's decision to focus on the medical sector for that event. I was always amazed at the diversity of conversation there. And it struck me the very first time I attended a conference on that, which was in Dublin, funny enough. That it's such a complex. I completely understood why that vertical had its own field service kind of show, as it were, because it's that much more complex, and field service is complex as it is. There's a lot of moving parts. Now, I'm just wondering, sorry, this is a very meandering question. I'm just wondering if it's that complexity in the buy-in cycle as well. I know it's the same over in the States. The different, there's very complex buy-in cycles. Certainly it is here in UK with the National Health Service involvement as well. Different setups across almost every country as well. State by state, it's different in America. Plus, there's technology challenges as well with all of the firewalls and the white room environments and all of that. It makes that what's a complex thing even more complex. And I'm wondering if medical and healthcare and those kind of healthcare devices, med tech, I wonder if because of that complexity, they've had to fight to show, or perhaps it's a little bit easier to show where the value is in the service they deliver, because they're not just turning up and with a wrench. I know that doesn't happen anymore, but you know what I mean. The analogy of the guy just shows up with a wrench. Well, medical's always had to be more complex, so maybe they're more advanced, and so therefore, is it a complexity that allows us to showcase our, the true value of our service and the value proposition? Gosh, that was a long-winded question. I apologise, Michael, but I think I can see you nodding along, so I think you've got the idea of where I'm going with
Yeah, no, that's interesting perspective. Yeah, I'd say the complexity, and the complexity is not just well, not just the complexity in servicing it, but because it's so complex, in a way, you can unbundle various aspects of that support because it's
Yeah,
complex and maybe because it's more advanced. So you could sell a customer just a parts only contract. You can sell a service contract. You can sell almost an insurance where we'll insure it, and then when it breaks, you call us and there's a claim that's issued, and we'll pay you back for the support
yeah,
that occurs
yeah.
in
That's
medical.
interesting. That brings me to another thought. I'll make this question a quicker one as well. But that brings me to another thought. One of the things I've been writing about a little bit recently, well, I've written a lot about it, actually. If you've seen the work on Field Service News, we've covered the whole conversation around remote solutions, remote service on multiple different assets, with some great different solution providers to cover different aspects. Done a number of case studies. The guys at Field Service News Research did some good work around a project there as well. So we've done a lot of very robust work. If that's something that you're, if that's an area you need to look at as a viewer and head over to the Field Service News library, because there's a ton of different bits, all different angles on that. One of the things I put in one of the more recent white papers, which I wrote in partnership with PTC, I put forward the case that we really need to make sure we have an understanding when we bring remote service in of the three tiers. I always call it the caterpillar model, and I don't know why, because Professor Andy Neely at Cambridge, I'm sure he once described it to me as caterpillar's model, and I've always called it that, and then somebody pointed out that it's not on their literature anywhere, so I apologise, Caterpillar. But the essence of that is essentially, I do it for myself, I want you to do it with me, or I want you to do it for me. And those three tiers. And I can see that in what you're talking about now with this service marketing, in terms of how that we can unbundle stuff. And
Sure.
do we need to, I mean, that's the kind of nuance that I don't think an external marketeer would understand. And I
Right.
think that's one of the bits that's missing. What do you think?
Yeah, and it's a bit of an evolution. So we had something, and I'm sure it existed in the UK maybe 10, 20 years ago, where they called it the precious metals. So it would be a bronze offering, a silver offering, a
Yeah.
gold offering, a platinum offering. And it made it easy to bundle things together and sell them. But now companies are wanting more levels of customization. So we're finding that those types of tiered or bundled approaches don't work as well as the ability to really offer it on a consultative basis and design the right solution. But nevertheless, what you talked about, do it, do it for you. What was it? Do it with you.
Do it for me, do it with me, or let me do it
Yeah,
myself.
I mean that's, as you know, that's a classic model for any kind of service these days. You know,
Yeah.
if you look at anyone that's doing coaching or consulting, that's part of their offering. They have three different offerings. But what I'm suggesting is it's got to be a little bit more complex, because the done for you, there may be 10 things, and one customer takes 8 of those things, another takes 7, another takes 4.
Is it almost a case?
And it's part of it is, yeah, I think it comes down to looking at the service delivery value chain
Yeah.
and how much of that the customer wants to own themselves and how much they need external support.
Yeah. Yeah. If funnily enough, that's exact. You need to read that paper that I've written, because I'd love to get your thoughts on
Oh,
it.
yeah, I will read
It's
it.
not, I'll send you a copy directly, but you can access it as a Field Service News Premium member in Field Service News Premium content, white papers. In fact, depending on when you're watching this, it may even be in the FSN standard resources as well. But one of the things people that have known me for a long time know that my original background, before I kind of got into service many years ago, I was a pretty mean cocktail maker and spent a long time in hospitality before I moved into a service role and then moved into publishing. It's almost like what you're describing to me is I want an a la carte menu, which I can pick and choose it from. But I also want the menu of the day, where I can go, right, I know I'm going to get all of this bundled together, and that's going to be my my free plates, and it's going to cost me X. Or actually, I just want to pick these bits, and it might be a little bit more expensive, but this is the service that I want. Is that a sensible route to kind
Yeah,
of?
yeah. In fact, the research we've been doing for decades supports that.
Yeah.
Is whenever we ask the end customer, what are they looking for in a service provider? One of the factors that was on a list is that they had a breadth of a service offering and could be a single point of contact. But it didn't necessarily mean that that's what they're going to buy. But knowing that that was available to them was what they
Yeah.
valued.
Yeah. I suppose that's the other piece, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because how often do we hear voice of the customer? How often do we hear the focus on customer? It's not customer satisfaction isn't enough anymore. It's customer experience, and in fact, that's not enough anymore. It's customer success.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
You know, yeah, we know these things within service operations. We know we should be measuring NPS, and we know we should be doing sentiment analysis. And these things are, customer satisfaction for the last 2 benchmarking studies that Field Service News Research did around KPIs. Customer satisfaction was right up there alongside the operational metrics, and that's been consistent now for a number of years. Why aren't we doing that when it comes to marketing? Why aren't we listening to what the customer is telling us? And then, that's sales 101, isn't it? Listen to what the customer tells you and then repeat it back to them. but do it with genuine earnest now. Don't just tell them that you got that. Repeat it back, but understand that. Build our service portfolio around it and phrase it in that kind of language. So, because what you're saying there is surely not only is it common sense, but I'm sure there's a huge amount of people watching this going, well, that's gold dust. That's what we need to be doing.
Exactly.
Is that something that you're coming across, organisations that are actually going to the customers and saying, what is that? What is it?
Well, we're pushing them to do that, but I'm finding that it's either people sitting around the table figuring out what's best for the customer, or talking to a handful of customers about an offering and saying, is this something you'd like? Not really deconstructing the service delivery value chain and looking at the various variations of service. Like, it's like steak versus, we'll give you steak, but do you want it medium rare? Do you want it rare? Do you want it well done? Is
Yeah.
if you think, so that'd be like a service contract, 4 hour, same day, next day, parts only, no parts, remote support, not remote support.
Yeah, so it's exactly. I'm with you. So the analogy there is right. Well, you advertise yourself as a steak restaurant, but there are these choices within that, and that's when it comes down to the sales point. But the most important thing you want is people to go in there and go, "I'm here because you do good steak," and then
Right, but you got to know what cuts they like, right? So that's where your research comes in your marketing, building
yeah.
demand.
And so how does an organisation go about researching that? Is that something that they? I mean, I know you've done work around that in the past. Um, is that the best route? Is to go to a specialist like yourself and say, look, we need to know this, or is that something that they should just
It
be?
can't hurt. I mean, I think it's a good idea to do that.
Sorry, I did without meaning to. I've put the second gratuitous plug in for you there. I always
Very
like to squeeze
grateful.
one in for yourself, but I
Well,
can't
I
really top
think you
that.
have to have some
Oh,
objectivity. Okay.
yeah,
So if it's someone from your organization talking to your customer, there's going to be some inherent bias. By the person asking the question, they're going to be biased. They might say they're being objective, but there might be something they're trying to lean towards, trying to see occur. Or on the opposite, there could be some bias from the person being asked the question. They might think
yeah,
this is what they want to hear, or they might assume that it's about something else.
yeah.
Or
That's
this is what
true.
I want to tell them. It has nothing to do with the question they're asking me, but I want them to hear my point of view. And then you get kind of
Yeah,
corrupted answers.
yeah. No, yeah. I can see that. I can see that. That's why a lot of the vendors engage with us to talk to our audience, because our audience know that we're a very, from the FSN research side of things, we research that because it gives us great content, which gives us a strong audience.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah, you guys do a
which
good job
we
with that.
have a layer of trust that we will never ever break, and we will never go into our research thinking, putting in that patsy question of which is the way that research marketing used to be worked, and I've always stood against that, and that gives us that layer of trust. And I suppose it's the same thing. It's that third party wanting to communicate. Um,
Exactly.
they might tell you something that they might be a little. I suppose even and yeah, even if it was a couple of chains of command away from Joe's contact. If Joe, if everything's bad with the service, well, it's good enough, not bad enough to leave. But there are a couple of things that you wish were better. But you know what? Good old Joe Bloggs, he's a really good guy. He always does his best. You don't want to get in trouble. So if Joe phones you, you're not going to really moan. And if Joe's colleague, you're thinking, well, I don't want to get Joe in trouble. It could be Joe's boss or whatever. So
Exactly.
yeah, I can see how that would skew that bias. So then that external organisation, do you say, well, this is anonymised as
We
well?
do.
Is that a route? Should always be anonymised
Well,
feedback?
no,
Or
well, it depends. I mean, sometimes
yeah,
we do kind of what you do sometimes. Like
yeah,
we're looking at the use of telematics in the government fleets. And we felt that we needed to mention our client's name, the vendor, to encourage a higher
yeah.
participation rate. But other
No, but
times, if
sorry,
we're
what I mean by that is when I say anonymised, I mean the other way around. So like obviously who they are, but that feedback they're leaving is anonymous feedback to a degree where it's like that's
oh yeah,
it's like
yeah, we do that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, because you're right. Because sometimes we saw this in focus groups. If the client knows the person who's in the focus group, they might discount. Oh, that guy always always was very opinionated. We can't put much credibility into it.
Yeah.
But just because that's their opinion doesn't mean that it's true, right? Even if it is opinionated, there's something in that opinion that's a value that you need to listen to.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's a roundabout way of answering your question.
Yeah. No, that's perfect. Look, I'm just looking at time, and I just want to shift the conversation ever so slightly, just because I really wanted to get into that conversation around service marketing, because like I said at the top, I think it's something that we need to talk more about, and I know that you're kind of leading the way in that sense. So,
Trying.
you know, I firmly, well, before we move on from that conversation, let's just wrap up the gratuitous plugs. If somebody does want to come and kind of connect with you around that topic, they head over to blumbergadvisorygroup.com, is it? Remind me of the website,
It's
Mike.
blumbergadvisor.com. Blumbergadvisors.com. I just found
Blumberg
out today
Advisor.
there's an investment bank who's Blumberg Advisor, but we're advisors, blumbergadvisors.com.
You should sue them.
Yes, I should.
Take them out.
Or they could email me at michaelblumberg at
Yeah.
blumbergadvisors.com.
Okay, so that's probably the easiest route, and also you're on LinkedIn and you're active on LinkedIn as well. So just look Michael up. Depending on where you're watching this, if you're in FSN Elite, you've got our Super Fancy Dan player, which shows you all of the showcases of all the interviews. So you have to do it the old-fashioned way there and type it in. But if you're watching this on fieldservicenews.com, or it's one of the snippets, there will be a link below. We'll revisit that as well, just to give people a chance at the end to kind of get that information. But the one shift I wanted to talk about, and we touched on it a little bit, and I mentioned,
Oh, boy, Chris, your memory is like the first thing to go. It's not Blumberg Advisors. I got confused by looking at the other company. It's Blumberg
so it is
Advisor.
Blumberg
No
Advisor.
S. No S.
No S,
Yeah.
no S.
Yeah.
Can we get a big Chiron, big graphic
There
on
you go.
screen?
I
No
did that on purpose, right?
Yeah. I'm sure there's an Alan Partridge sketch that says no cheese.
Yeah.
Custard's okay. If you get that reference, you'll understand it. Okay, we'll get those links on there. The one other thing I wanted to talk about, though, Michael, which we touched on, and I don't think there's many corners of this that I haven't touched at the minute. So I'm really keen to just get your opinion again, just to see how this is pieced together. But I've done a ton of work around the importance of remote solutions. This is where I've got to on it. So I'll give you my thesis, and you can tell me where it's wrong. I think the pandemic drove huge mass adoption of remote service out of necessity. I think what that has meant is we've got a ton of companies that have landed at a place, and I mean this from the service provider and the customer side, where they suddenly went, this works. Okay. I don't need to send an engineer out straight away every call, or I don't need an engineer or a technician to come to my site to fix something. We can get the solution quicker by leveraging whichever type of tools. So I think the idea of remote service has taken seed. I think that the pandemic lasted long enough, the lockdowns lasted long enough for it to become habit and to be an accepted habit as well. I think if the lockdowns had only been 2 months or whatever right at the beginning, I think perhaps we would have bounced more towards the status quo. But I think we've been doing things this way for such an amount of time that we've seen the positives, and we've also seen, we just got used to it, basically. Was it 66 days to... That's either my telephone. Oh, sorry. Talking about remote service, mine's talking to me. What I've lost my train of thought.
Intelligent remote service too.
Exactly, intelligent remote service. Well, it's not that intelligent because it got the wrong answer.
Okay.
I won't name and shame the brand, but what I will say is, remote service is here now. What I'm seeing is all of these companies have arrived at this point, but there is a lot of the research that we did towards the end of the year, we saw 83% of service organisations saying they could deliver service remotely in some way, but over 3/4 of those were still using a telephone. Only 41%, I think it was, had remote diagnostic tools, and only 19% were using augmented reality. I may have got some of those numbers ever so slightly wrong because I haven't looked at that study for a month or so. what that says to me is we've suddenly landed at this place where I think remote service and how we deliver service remotely could be a massive battleground. I think that we know that, going back to the marketing piece and to segue this across, we know that you can differentiate against your competitors with excellent service. We know that remote service is going to become prevalent, if not has already. And we know that there's a massive variance in how organizations are delivering service remotely. Some are using tools like Help Lightning or XM Reality, really sophisticated far end tools. Others are simply picking up the telephone soon. And I think there's a big difference there in how that service is perceived. So I think that's going to be a massive battleground in the next 12 to 18 months. I also think that there is a huge opportunity to grab some market share right now in doing that. And also, we've seen the continuing shift towards servitization. It hasn't been diminished by the pandemic. If anything, it's been slightly accelerated, although our thinking has been a bit more refined. Which means that when that market share is grabbed, one of the things about servitization is it's a lot easier to hold on to the business once you've got it. So that's where I see the big battleground at the minute. It's why I've focused on it quite a lot, because I think it's important that companies know all of the ins and outs of this conversation. It's a very complex kind of conversation around getting remote service right. Easy to get the idea, but to get it right is a bit of a different challenge. That's my kind of current. That's where I think a lot of companies need to be focusing in terms of digital transformation, in terms of service design and strategy. I'd love to get your thoughts, because I know you've done quite a bit of work around this as well. So again, I'll just cede the floor to you now.
Yeah, 100%. I think agree with you. This is where the next battleground is. There's so many layers to remote support, as you described. Also, use cases. Where do you use remote support and the tools like augmented reality? I've you've probably read. I've written for you, and I've written some white papers, and I refer to this as remote support are going to be table stakes. Just like you can't think of service delivered without mobile devices or without a mobile component to it, or dynamic scheduling. If you're managing a large field force, you can't think of service without remote support. I also saw some research from TSIA that I think in the last 6 months, 76% of the companies they surveyed said that they've tried to eliminate on-site service and switch towards remote support.
That's interesting. That's interesting. I mean, from I think where see, this is where I see it evolving. This is how I see the hybrid kind of evolving. I think that tier one, tier two triage will go through remote. I think AI will have a big role to play. I've seen some really cool technology, some good solutions like that. Quant, amongst others, have to tip my hat to those guys. The work they've done is very impressive. And I think just that improvement of putting the knowledge where it's needed in the triage stage, particularly via the contact center.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, you could avoid
I
so
think,
many calls and also be more effective and efficient when you do dispatch if you do proper remote
yeah.
support.
Well, I remember an article. I'm trying to think who wrote this. It may have been Jan van Ven. But somebody recently, I was looking at this recently, and somebody wrote, back about 2016, 2017, I said the goal of remote service is to only ever have to send an engineer as the last resort. And when that engineer is sent, they should be sent essentially with like a 98% chance of getting that first time fix rate, because the triage should be done, the parts should be ordered, we should know everything. All of that can be done by remote, and really it's just we need the hands on site. But then the flip side of that for me is I think there's a danger. I referenced Tony Chapman earlier. I'm going to reference him again. It's the same conversation I was having with him actually around the importance of the engineer turning up, etc. Turning up smart, van at the front. It's also the subject matter. This is what he explained to me very well. He's eloquent guy, but he's able to speak at my level, which is speaking down for a lot of people. So I always appreciate that. And he was explaining to me, it's the opportunity to have a brand ambassador. We all know that on site with the customer. That's invaluable for the service organisation. But equally, for the customer, the opportunity to have a true subject matter expert available and to have their ear for the hour, 2 hours, however long they're on site, that has a huge value. Perhaps linking back to the marketing conversation, that has a huge intrinsic value that's not. It's very hard to quantify. It's very intangible, but there's a massive value having that subject matter expert on site. I personally think that will be that consultancy piece, that subject matter piece. I think that will be where you get your service portfolio, your service agreement will be unlimited or an X amount of remote service calls, remote solution calls. We can weave augmented reality into that. We've got our RPA processes taking out all of that good stuff there. But once a quarter or once a year or once whatever it is, the engineer will go on site and they will do optimization, and they won't just be looking at the couple of assets there. They'll be looking at how those assets sit across a fleet. They'll be able to provide data that says, look, actually, off our entire install base, we can see that, if you tweak this ever so slightly, you'll get a 0.2% lift in it up, those kind of things, that true knowledge of how to make sure the assets are just running, but they're running at their very, very best, and how to kind of help map out the next step, the next evolution. I think that's where the role of the service engineer may end up.
It could be, or it could be morphed into a new role, like a service account manager. But
Yeah,
I like your
yeah, I
point
think that's
is,
what I've got in my head.
yeah, I like your point that you're now able to monetize something that
Mm,
people value and expect to get. But I think at the end of the day, that most people would rather have their service issue resolved quickly,
mm,
and if they could do it remotely, they're going to be fine with that. I think the on-site guy has just as much, probably maybe even more value to the company who providing the on-site guy, than the customer. But needless to say that if you do put it into account management role and you're offering these advanced services and professional services, they would value that.
yeah, I see it almost as becoming. It's almost like the audit.
Yeah.
It's the biannual audit or the annual audit, and it's where the subject matter goes in. And I think it is merging those two roles. It's the account manager with the senior engineer.
Yes.
But it's
Agreed.
merging those roles so that somebody can go in and spend time on site. And of course, then,
But at
I
the
mean,
same
this
time,
is
it's moving away from that guy's on site. I'm going to get free consulting. This
yeah,
is
yeah,
right, and that's
exactly,
something we don't want to do either.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's one of the mortal sins of service, which I see done so often, is giving it away. How many service leaders know have had that argument with their their head of sales? Stop giving service away because it devalues it. But I think that that's where I see that headed. And then that transactional stuff, that quick stuff, that easy, I think that's all remote. That's where I see it going.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
we're aligned on that. Totally.
Perfect. Well, listen, I think I've used up all of your time today. Not all of it. I know
Well,
you've
it's
got a busy
always a
day, but
pleasure.
all your spare time that you've got to spend some time with me. Well, it's always a pleasure.
Same here.
Is there any right? Let's make sure we got the website right this time. Do it one more time, and you can't mess it up anymore. You've got to get it right first time.
Yeah, right. It's my website. I got to get it right.
Yeah, you should know it.
www.blumbergadvisor.com.
BlumbergAdvisor.com. We'll get that on a Chiron across the screen, please,
Great.
as well. No S. Brilliant. Excellent. So please do connect with Michael. We'll put his email as well on the Chiron as well. Reach out to him there. If you're watching this on one of the formats that allows us to put links, I'll put the links below as well. Also, do head over to fieldservicenews.com. If you're on our premium membership, head over to FSN Elite, have a little look around. It's elite.fieldservicenews.com. You can actually find in there the catalogue where Michael's courses will be contained, as well as a number of different other courses, different providers. Essentially, it's a marketplace for education. On the front page, on the catalogue there, you can find that. If you join FSN Elite, it's only a small fee for an upgrade. You'll get access to the entire Field Service News Masterclass program. We're rolling out different courses across the year. By the end of this year, there'll be over 15 hours worth of different projects. Each course is approximately 3 hours long, so you can got some real projects you can work through there. That also gives you access to all the good stuff that you have on FSM Premium anyway as well. And we'll be doing live events. Have I roped you in to do one of those live events with us yet, Michael? I don't think I have.
I
So
think we have to talk about that. Yeah.
we'll get that on. So these are going to be live sessions with breakout rooms as well. They're in FSN Elite. There's one a week. It's a bargain. So do join us over there. But beyond that, thank you as well for your support, of course, with the Digital Symposium. It is because of your support that we are able to get such great guests on, including Michael, and all of the work that we're able to do. It's because we have a community that is behind us, and that's what allows us to keep the conversation rolling. So thank you all. Thank you, Michael, for being my guest today. It has been a pleasure as always to catch up. I'm hoping, do you reckon we might just be able to meet up in person at some point this year?
Oh boy, I'm hoping so. Yeah.
Very long overdue a beer.
Yeah.
Hopefully it'll be on
Agreed.
this side of the Atlantic because the beer is better.
That's for sure.
But we will look forward to catching up one way or the other. I'm Kris Oldland. I'm the Editor-in-Chief of Field Service News, and I shall see you all again soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.